Hey guys, tonight, we're setting sail into a slow, sea-salted swirl of windwood and wonder as we follow the quietly ambitious Norse voyages to North America. You're bundled up in itchy wool, rocking gently aboard a dragon-prowed Nar sails, billowing the smell of salt and fish gut, mingling with frozen breath. The sky is smeared with low, pale light, the kind that makes you unsure if it's sunrise or a very reluctant noon. The water slaps against the hull, with a rhythm that makes you drowsy, even though you probably shouldn't be. You're going exploring after all. Also, you probably won't survive this, not because of pirates or krakens or anything fun, but because you'll likely freeze to death, run out of food, or fall off a cliff while trying to gather moss for soup. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your local time, and where you're listening from, I love seeing our sleepy little global village light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, as most good Viking tales do, in the snow-dusted isolation of Greenland. You're standing at the edge of a rocky outcrop, staring out across the North Atlantic, your boots sinking slightly into frost-crusted earth. Behind you lies a smattering of turf-roofed homes puffing faint smoke from holes in their sod like sleepy chimneys. Ahead lies, well, nobody really knows. But you've heard things, whispers passed from sailor to sailor, trader to trader, about another land out there west beyond the waves. Your guide, a red-bearded man with wind-chapped cheeks and entirely too much confidence, Eric the Red Sun Leif. Leif Erikson isn't your average Viking bro. He's thoughtful, pious sort of, and probably didn't kill too many people. The sagas call him Leif the Lucky, which sounds promising though. Let's be honest, it could just mean he didn't get eaten by a bear. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Leif hears of a strange place from another Norseman named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had seen a stretch of land during a storm years earlier, but, in true Norse fashion, couldn't be bothered to stop and explore it. This little nugget of inaction gives Leif an idea: why not go find the mystery land and have a proper look? Maybe even bring back something more exciting than fish bones and seal oil. You join the preparations. The Nar, a broad-shouldered, cargo-friendly ship, is loaded with dried fish barrels of sour milk and a few bored sheep. You'd think a group of men planning to explore a new continent might bring better provisions, but hey. Viking cuisine was never known for its flair. The wind finally picks up, and with it, your stomach. The first few days are a blur of wave spray and regret. You try not to think about how many people have vanished in these waters, swallowed up by storms or icebergs, or simply slipping off the side when no one's looking. There are no life jackets here, just the cold indifference of the sea and a crew with very questionable singing voices. Historians still argue whether Leif's route took him directly west or veered south, hugging the icy shelf of Baffin Island before drifting toward Newfoundland. But wherever you go, it's a lonely journey. The sky gets grayer. The seabirds vanish. The nights stretch longer. You sleep curled up against barrels that smell like pickled sadness, listening to the creak of wood and the faint groans of men too stubborn to turn around. Then land. Low, flat, and misty, it doesn't exactly scream paradise. You approach it like someone poking a sleeping bear, curious but prepared to run. The coastline is littered with rocks and scrubby trees. The air smells earthy, mossy, and new. Leif calls it Helluland Stone Slabland, which, to be fair, is exactly what it looks like. You don't stay long. The ground's too hard, the weather too cranky, and the fish give you judgmental looks. Back to the boat. Further south now, you reach a place that's a bit more welcoming, maybe even grape-adjacent. The sagas describe self-sown wheat and grapes, but you mostly see shrubs and vines that look like they've seen better centuries. Still, this land feels different. The air is milder, the trees taller. Leif names it Vinland, which sounds like a hip Nordic wine bar, but really just means land of wine or possibly land of hope, and highly questionable plant identification. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the grapes were actually gooseberries or crowberries. Others think the Vikings just got excited about anything remotely round that didn't bite back. Either way, you and the crew build a few temporary huts, poke around for resources, and try not to think about how utterly alone you are. There's no instant fame, no dragons to slay, no gold-laced temples, just a quiet land breathing steadily under a vast, empty sky. You wonder if you'll even remember the journey, or if it'll become just another sailor's tale passed down and muddled like a game of Norse telephone. You squint into the morning mist as Leif and the crew prepare to explore this not quite mythical shore. The air smells faintly of pine sap and damp earth. It's quiet, almost too quiet. No clanging bells, no bleating livestock, no distant chants or village dogs barking at strangers. Just trees. Miles and miles of trees. And maybe, if you're not just hearing things, the faint crackle of a raven's wings overhead. The settlement begins with the usual Viking logic. If we're staying even temporarily, we're building stuff. Leif directs the men to chop timber, accept surprise. The trees are different here. Not as sturdy as back home. Some are crooked and thin, like they gave up halfway through growing. Still, you make do. You help raise some small timber frames, wedge turf blocks into the gaps, and line the floors with moss and animal hides. Welcome to Viking glamping. The walls breathe the roof leaks, and your pillow is a fish. While your hands are busy, your ears are picking up gossip. The crew's moods are a mix of awe and unease. This place feels bountiful, maybe even blessed, but it's also eerily untouched. You start wondering, are you the first people here, or just the first who came by boat and stayed long enough to name things? The land seems to change as you move southward. One day it's rocky and hard, the next it's loamy and full of signs of animal life. Eventually you arrive at a spot Leif deems good enough for a base camp. Here the grass grows higher, the game is more plentiful, and the sun finally starts acting like it's heard of spring. You gather what you can, berries, roots, herbs you don't recognize, but taste anyway, somewhat against your better judgment. The sagas describe these early days with an odd calm, as if the explorers were just happy to not be freezing or eating dried walrus. Now and then, the men stumble across what they think are human signs, an old fire pit maybe, or a strangely arranged line of stones. Leif says nothing, but you can see his eyes narrowing slightly. You begin to sense it too, that tingle on the back of your neck that says someone's watching, but it's subtle. Nothing shows itself. Just the rustle of leaves, the crunch of underbrush, and the occasional inexplicable footprint near your camp in the morning. Meanwhile, Leif and his crew are journaling the Viking way, which is to say, loudly reciting their impressions to each other, probably exaggerating them just a little, and letting the oral tradition do the rest. It's how history gets remembered here, out loud, over fires between gulps of ale. You catch phrases like, "Never seen such trees richer than Greenland, and a place where the gods have clearly smiled." Historians still argue whether this land was truly as fertile as the sagas claim. Some suggest Leif's crew encountered Newfoundland or Labrador during a particularly warm climate period. Others think the richness was mostly relief after Greenland's rock-hard soil and icy despair. Perspective matters. Your feet start to know this place. You walk through forests filled with thick undergrowth and birds that don't fear you yet. At dusk, you sit on a boulder by a sluggish river, watching insects dart over the surface. There's a strange stillness in your chest, a quiet awe at the fact that you're possibly the first of your kind to breathe this particular patch of air. Then one morning you follow Leif to the shoreline. He crouches near a curious vine, wrapping itself around a dead branch. He plucks a handful of its dark, bulbous fruit and pops one into his mouth. You watch his face like a gambler watching dice. He pauses, chews, swallows, nods. Doesn't die. Grapes, he says. You eat one too. It's tart and mealy and definitely not a grape in the Mediterranean sense, but hey, if Leaf wants to name the place Vinland, let him. Maybe it's aspirational. Maybe it's just good PR. A quirky detail. Some researchers think the grapes were just sour choke cherries or wild partridge berries. Others suggest the Norse simply didn't have a word for it. Looks like a fruit and won't kill you, so they defaulted to grapes. The days slide by. Your hands become calloused. You start naming hills and rivers, even though those names might vanish into history like smoke into mist. There's a slow comfort in the repetition: hunt, cook, repair, sleep. But the silence in the forest, it lingers. Every now and then, someone swears they heard voices or saw movement just beyond the tree line. There's a feeling now, more than a fact, that you're not alone. You wake up to the sound of rustling outside the turf walls. Not the usual rustling, this is sharper, closer, deliberate. You freeze. Just your luck, the day you finally manage to sleep through the chilly sunrise, someone decides to creep up on camp. You grab your belt knife throw on your rough wool cloak and step into the crisp morning. It's a deer. Just a deer. But it looked back at you for a long, too long second before trotting off into the woods, as if to say, sleep lighter. The quiet tension has started seeping into everything. Conversations around the campfire now linger on the possibility of others. Not ghosts or gods, though one crewman insists he saw Odin himself lurking in the trees, but real people. Locals, natives, Skraelings, some call them, though the term is vague, possibly even pejorative, and no one knows exactly where it came from. You just know it means not us. This isn't Europe. There are no marked borders, no town gates, no roads to follow. Every new path you scout feels like crossing into someone else's living room without knocking. And then, one afternoon, you find something impossible to ignore. A canoe-shaped imprint in the mud along the riverbank, half faded but unmistakably carved by human hands. You don't mention it to the others, not right away. Later, someone else finds a fish trap made of stone and twine. Then it's a bit of worked bone. Then a scrap of hide too finely tanned for any of your crew. The pattern is clear: you are not alone. And whoever's here is far better at being quiet than you are. One evening, as twilight bleeds into a deep, smoky blue, you hear it: voices. Not birds, not the trees, but people. Laughing, maybe, or chanting. You creep to the edge of the woods, your breath catching with every step. And there they are, just silhouettes in the distance. 5 or 6 figures tall and lean, draped in furs, paddling upriver in long, shallow canoes. They do not stop. They do not wave. They vanish upstream like mist, leaving you staring after them with a heart full of questions and a stomach full of dread. Historians still argue whether these early encounters were peaceful or tense. Some sagas suggest there was trade-red cloth exchanged for pelts, metal for meat. Others recall skirmishes, misunderstandings, or worse. The truth, like most history, probably lies somewhere blurry in the middle. Your crew begins arguing over what to do. Some want to pack up and sail back to Greenland, claiming Vinland is cursed or already claimed. Others think it's proof you've landed somewhere worth keeping. If the locals want it, that must mean it's good, right? Leif stays calm, annoyingly calm. He reminds everyone that his father, Eric the Red, was exiled for murder and still managed to find and colonize Greenland. So maybe we can all chill out and trust the process. To lighten the mood, someone tells a story about Thorvald Leif's brother, who allegedly tried to chase the locals away by waving his axe and shouting nonsense. The punchline: He tripped over a root and knocked himself out cold before anyone could respond. Totally unverified, of course. Probably apocryphal. Still funny. You begin to notice things changing in the camp. People speak in lower voices. Fires are made smaller, shielded behind rocks. Scouts go out in pairs, and they never go far. It's like the entire group has silently agreed that this is no longer an expedition, it's survival with manners. A quirky detail buried in the sagas, one Viking reportedly tried to impress the locals by offering dairy. Turns out that the indigenous peoples of North America, possibly not having developed a tolerance for lactose, found it revolting. Diplomatic milk not recommended. Tensions finally crest when a hunting group doesn't return on time. A full day passes. Then two. Just as Leif is organizing a search party, the hunters stumble back into camp pale and shaken. They weren't attacked, but they were followed. Watched. Shadowed step for step. And when they tried to confront the watchers, they vanished like smoke. From that point on, the decision to leave starts becoming real. Your dreams get stranger, more vivid. You dream of canoes made of shadow of voices, calling from behind trees of grapes that whisper warnings as you eat them. When you wake, your hands ache from clenching your axe all night. Historians still debate how long Leif's camp actually lasted. Some say a single summer. Others say multiple years with sporadic trips back to Greenland. But the sagas are clear about one thing, and the encounters with the locals became too risky. The land might have been rich, the forests wide, but they were not empty. And the Norse, for all their bravado, knew when they'd overstayed their welcome. One morning, with no ceremony, you help take down the shelter walls. You roll up furs, pack what iron tools you can carry, and drag the boat back to the shore. The trees feel closer now, like they're watching your retreat with quiet judgment. The wind shifts salty and cold. It smells like home. You're sailing again. The sea is colder now, the wind heavier, and your boat groans like it knows the way home, but would rather not take it. The shoreline recedes slowly behind you, and you squint back one last time at the dense green fringe of trees you left behind. Somewhere in there, strangers watched your every move. And somewhere in your gut, there's a knot you can't quite untie. Was it fear, regret, or just a strong craving for a warm bowl of barley stew? The journey back isn't as filled with the thrill of discovery. The crew is quieter, more introspective. No one's pointing at birds anymore or arguing about which cloud looks most like Thor's goat. You wrap your cloak tighter and try to distract yourself with the waves, but even they seem moody. Leif seems to carry the same weight. He spends long hours staring out over the water, saying little, his mouth tight with thought. When someone asks if he thinks we'll return to Vinland, he simply says, someday, which is either wise leadership or vague PR spin for absolutely not depending on your level of cynicism. Still, there are stories to tell. As soon as you dock back in Greenland, the gossip begins like wildfire on dry grass. The tales grow taller in every retelling. The trees were taller than mountains, grapes rolled down the hills like thunder. A local shot an arrow so straight, it knocked the helmet off a sleeping man without waking him. You try to correct the facts once or twice, but you're met with blank stares and raised eyebrows. Eventually, you give up and lean into the legend. After all, nobody wants to fall asleep to tales of cautious diplomacy and unfinished huts. Mainstream historical fact backs this up in part. Leif Erikson's voyages were later celebrated more for what they symbolized than for their lasting success. While there was no long-term settlement, the mere fact that Norse explorers reached North America centuries before Columbus became a rallying point for national pride, particularly in 19th century Scandinavia and among Scandinavian Americans. Meanwhile, the Vinland brand takes off. You hear it everywhere at feasts and poems, even carved into bits of driftwood like a proto-tourism slogan. I went to Vinland, and all I got was this lousy frostbite. You make that joke once, and it actually sticks. You're proud of that. Leif earns a new nickname, Leif the Lucky, which is ironic because nothing about the voyage felt particularly lucky. Maybe it's sarcastic. Maybe it's sincere. Either way, he doesn't seem to mind. Time passes. You settle back into life in Greenland. The winter is harsher than usual, and you spend long nights bundled in fur staring into the flickering glow of a whale oil lamp. You hear rumors that someone is planning another expedition back to Vinland. Maybe Leif's brother, maybe one of the Icelandic settlers. Everyone seems to have a cousin who knows a guy who's building a boat. Historians still argue whether the Norse truly intended to establish a permanent colony in North America. The sagas suggest repeated attempts, some say even small houses were built. But logistical nightmares, strained indigenous relations, and limited resources probably made long-term survival untenable. It's like trying to start a food truck in the middle of a snowstorm with no customers and questionable Wi-Fi. You drift into memory more often than you'd like to admit. Sometimes you can almost taste those tart, wild grapes, feel the unfamiliar softness of the soil under your boots, or hear the rustling that wasn't quite the wind. The past has teeth and it bites softly but often. One night, after too much mead and not enough sleep, you find yourself sketching the coast of Vinland into the frost on the inside of the window. You draw the river the Grove where you saw the canoes, and the spot where the berry bushes grew thickest. Then you watch it melt slowly with the dawn. A quirky bit of trivia. Centuries later, someone in Newfoundland will dig up iron nails buried deep in the soil right where no indigenous group used iron smelting. These, along with post holes and sod wall outlines, will lead to the rediscovery of Longso Meadows' solid archaeological proof that the Norse were in fact here. You don't know any of that, of course. But something in you hopes that someone someday will find your footprints in the dirt and wonder who you were. As spring approaches, the world shifts again. Trade resumes. The fjords thaw. You help mend sails and sharpen axes. No one talks much about returning to Vinland anymore, but you see it in their eyes, a glimmer of unfinished business. Maybe you'll go back someday. Or maybe someone else will, and they'll do it better, wiser, with more socks. That would be smart. No one brought enough socks last time. Still, you fall asleep some nights, imagining the boat creaking under your feet again, the salt spray hitting your face, and the horizon stretching out ahead like a promise too big to ignore. And deep down, you know the story's not over. Not really. You wake up one day to the news, someone's going back. It's not Leif this time. He's got other duties managing Greenland settlement and trying not to look too smug every time someone calls him the man who found Vinland. Instead, it's his brother Thorvald. Yes, that's his real name. Yes, it sounds like a Marvel character. And yes, he has the temperament of someone who always believes he's right, even when he's lost in his own longhouse. Thorvald is determined. He believes the first voyage was just the beginning, a prologue. We didn't fail, he says we scouted. Now it's time to settle. You're not entirely sure how he talked you into joining again. Maybe it was the free passage. Maybe it was the itch in your feet. Maybe it was just that you never stopped thinking about those forests, those grapes, and that strange stillness you couldn't explain. So once more, you board a Nar sails, billowing like the chest of someone about to tell a half-true fishing story. The sea knows you now. Or maybe it's laughing at you. Either way, you cross with fewer surprises this time, though the waves still find creative new ways to drench your socks. When you arrive, the land greets you like an old friend who's a little surprised you came back. You set up camp again near the same rivers, rebuild the turf walls, and hope this time things will be different. Better. Quieter. They're not. Thorvald, bless his confidence, decides to explore further down the coast. He's curious, restless, maybe a little bored with domesticating grapevines. You and a small group sail around the headlands, mapping the coast with rough sketches and pointed guesses. The beaches stretch out pale and empty. The forests seem thicker. Somewhere inland smoke curls lazily into the sky. You pretend not to see it. Then one day, it happens. You're sitting near the shore, fixing a broken oar and humming something tuneless when a group of strangers appears across the river. The Skraelings, your nickname for the indigenous people, though no one really knows what it means, are watching. Again, this time there's no silent tension. It escalates fast. Voices rise, arrows fly. You duck behind a rock as someone screams. One of your crew goes down clutching his side. The camp becomes chaos. Thorvald is hit by an arrow while giving orders, and the men scramble to carry him back to the boat. Mainstream history backs this moment. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Thorvald's voyage ended in tragedy after a skirmish with the local inhabitants. He was reportedly buried on a headland in Vinland, marked with a cross his dreams of founding a settlement ending quietly in the soil he barely got to know. You help carry him ashore, your arms shaking more from disbelief than fatigue. The wound is bad. There's blood. Thorvald tries to joke something about how this isn't how he imagined conquering a continent. But his voice is weak, like the last breath of wind before a long stillness. That night, the stars above seem unusually clear. No one sleeps. You sit around the fire, faces drawn and silent, and the forest hums with unseen movement. The next morning, you bury him. No speech. Just a moment of silence, the kind that says everything and nothing at once. The cross you raise is simple, rough-hewn. The wind tugs at it gently, as if to say, even this won't last. A quirky tidbit. Later tales say Thorvald's ghost lingered near the site of his burial. Not in a spooky drag-you-into-the-swamp kind of way, but in a melancholic, unfinished business kind of haunting. Like he never stopped believing Vinland could be something more. Historians still argue whether the conflict with indigenous peoples was avoidable or inevitable. Were the Norse too arrogant, assuming the land was empty or theirs to take? Or were they simply unprepared for the reality of living alongside cultures they didn't understand and couldn't communicate with? It's a question with no easy answer, and one that echoes far beyond these short voyages. Eventually, the decision is made to leave. Again. But this time it feels heavier, more final. You pack your things quietly, folding every rope, every cloak, every regret into the boat. The wind pushes you off the shore like a sigh. The land watches you go silent, unbothered, ancient. You look back once, trying to mark the place in your mind. The trees sway. A bird calls. Somewhere beneath those branches lies a man who believed the future lived here. As the coast disappears into mist, no one speaks. There's nothing left to say. Vinland isn't a failure exactly, but it's no longer a dream. It's something in between, a whisper of possibility lost in the roar of reality. You're back in Greenland again, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. The longhouses creak the same way. The seals still bark from the rocky shore. The stew is still somehow both too salty and too bland. But after Vinland, everything seems smaller, less epic, less charged with potential. Even the sea, which once whispered of new lands and fortunes, now feels like a moody roommate who knows too much. Leif welcomes you quietly. He doesn't ask too many questions, and you don't offer too many answers. There's a weight between you both, the unspoken truth that Thorvald won't be walking through the door, cursing about bent swords or bad bread. You try to settle back into routine. There are things to fix, sheep to wrangle, rumors to ignore. But every so often, someone will lean in and ask, is it true? Did you see the grapes? Were the people really that fast with a bow? You answer politely, sometimes truthfully. Other times you let your stories drift into dreamland. After all, what's the harm in saying the sun sets sideways and the bears could speak French? Soon another plan is brewing, because of course it is. This time it's a full family affair. Freydis Leif's half-sister is organizing the next voyage. If Leif is quiet, Freydis is thunder. She walks like she owns the land beneath her boots and has no interest in letting Vinland fade into folklore. You're intrigued. Freydis doesn't just want to explore, she wants to build something. A real settlement. With turf houses, livestock, everything. She teams up with two Icelandic brothers, Helgi and Finnbogi. Let's just say the group dynamics could use a mediator. Still you join. Again, the crossing is brutal this time. Storms roll in like angry gods playing dice. The boats split in the night, and for a few terrifying hours, you think you're alone in the ocean. But morning comes, and with it, the familiar green coastline. Vinland. You land exhausted but alive and begin the process once more. Trees fall. Earth is dug. Walls go up. The livestock bleats nervously, as if it remembers last time. But something's off. Freydis is fierce, yes, but she's also increasingly irritable, even paranoid. The brothers Helgi and Finnbogi build their own camp nearby, and tensions simmer like an overcooked stew. You find yourself glancing over your shoulder more than usual, not for arrows, but for glances. Then comes the breaking point. No one's exactly sure what happened. Maybe it was an argument over who got the better boat. Maybe someone stole someone's pickled seal meat. Maybe it was just the cumulative effect of living in tight quarters with clashing egos and too much fermented milk. Whatever the reason, one day it escalates. Freydis accuses the brothers of betrayal. Voices rise. Weapons are drawn. You don't see it all, but by the time the shouting ends, the brothers and their men are dead. The main saga accounts differ. Some say Freydis ordered their execution to eliminate rivals. Others paint her as more cunning than cruel. But the end result is the same blood on the snow and silence in the camp. A quirky, grim tidbit. One version claims Freydis, pregnant at the time, grabbed a sword and scared off attacking Skraelings by beating her chest and howling like a berserker. Historians still argue whether this actually happened, or if it was an early Viking attempt at influencer branding. After that, the mood changes. The settlement no longer feels like a promise, it feels like a punishment. You keep your head down, focus on practical tasks, and count the days until the return trip. Eventually, the decision is made. Again, it's time to go. You pack quickly, avoiding eye contact with Freydis, who stands at the edge of camp like a general watching a retreat. She doesn't look defeated, just disappointed. Or maybe that's just your projection. Either way, you don't linger. The journey back is faster. Or maybe you're just numb to the passage of time now? The sea rolls beneath you like an old lullaby, one that no longer surprises, but still comforts in its own briny way. When you return to Greenland this time, there are no cheers, no songs. Just tired feet on cold stone and the smell of fish that's been sitting a little too long in the sun. Mainstream historical fact tells us that Freydis's expedition was likely the last Norse attempt to settle Vineland. While later voyages may have revisited the shores, none attempted to build communities again. It had become clear the land was beautiful, fertile, full of promise, but it was not meant for them. Historians still debate what exactly doomed the Vinland experiments. Was it the distance from Greenland and Iceland, the lack of reinforcements, the friction with indigenous groups? Or was it internal discords, the kind that rots even the strongest ships from the inside out? You don't have answers, but you do have memories. The way the trees leaned in the wind, the way the fog curled around the hills in the morning, the way the soil clung to your boots as if reluctant to let go. At night, you lie in your longhouse, staring at the rafters, listening to the wind rattle the walls. You wonder if Vinland still remembers you. If somewhere a bent nail or a broken comb lies buried beneath the moss, waiting for the right pair of hands to find it again. And you wonder quietly if you'll ever stop dreaming about a place that almost was. You wake up one morning in Greenland, and something has shifted. There's no storm outside, no wolf howling from the hills, no alarming news, just the creeping realization that you've become a story. Around you, the younger generation gathers wide-eyed to hear the tales of Vinland. They ask about the wild grapes, the towering trees, the people who moved silently through the woods. You tell them bits and pieces, but you also watch your words. Memory is a tricky tool. It sharpens some edges and blurs others. The truth, you're not sure what to feel. There's pride, of course. You went further than most. Saw new lands. Helped build homes on a continent that to your world barely existed in rumor. But there's also disappointment. And a peculiar emptiness like holding onto a map that leads to a place no one wants to visit anymore. The Norse world seems to agree. Talk of Vinland begins to fade. Not because people doubt it existed, but because they're tired. Greenland needs tending. Iceland has its own struggles. And Norway, that faraway parent of them all, is focused on politics, taxes, and the occasional awkward saint-making ceremony. Still whispers persist. Merchants mutter about timber from a strange land. Monks copy sagas that mention places where the sun barely sets. And every now and then, someone claims to have seen an arrow carved from redwood or a boat plank that smelled faintly of foreign pine. Mainstream historical records tell us that life's voyage and those that followed were never fully forgotten. They were preserved in the oral tradition and eventually written down in two main Icelandic sagas, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. These don't agree on every detail. One puts Leif in the driver's seat. The other gives more spotlight to Freydis and Bjarni. Historians still argue whether the discrepancies are due to different family biases or simply the fog of memory dressed up in literary flair. And here's a quirky little twist. In 1960, on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, archaeologists Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad discovered a site called Lance aux Meadows. It had unmistakable Norse features, turf buildings, iron nails, even a forge. It was the proof modern scholars needed to confirm what your sea-weary bones already knew: you were really there. Vinland existed. Of course, your version of Vinland was much more than a cluster of turf buildings. It was a place of breathtaking green hills, tense encounters, boatloads of ambition, and quiet unravelings. A place where hope met reality and tried valiantly to make a settlement out of stubbornness. But let's be honest, the world isn't always ready for ambitious dreams. You wander one day into a longhouse where an old friend is telling your story. He's adding some flair you don't recall, fighting off 5 bears with a spoon, but the room is captivated. You slip into a quiet corner, listen, and smile. There's something comforting about being turned into folklore. It means your life mattered enough to be exaggerated. Meanwhile, Freydis is still around. She's older now, but still walks like she owns the horizon. People tread carefully around her. The sagas will eventually paint her as both a hero and a villain, depending on who's telling the tale. You're not sure which version is more accurate. But you know she never apologized. And Leif, he's mellowed. Less the bold explorer now, more the keeper of maps and memories. He still maintains the longhouse and still carves boats, though more for tradition than travel. Sometimes he'll sit beside you and ask quietly, "Do you ever think about going back?" You both know the answer. Of course you do. But going back and staying back are two very different beasts. Winter returns with a quiet vengeance. The sea ices over. The sky turns slate gray. You tend to your duties repairing that roof beam, checking on the livestock, keeping the younger ones from setting themselves on fire, trying to make magic with whale oil. But at night, your dreams still drift westward, to the sound of wind in foreign trees. to the eerie stillness before that first arrow flew, to the smell of soil untouched by plows. You remember the first time you saw Vinland, how the coastline unfolded like a promise, and you wonder, not for the first time, if it was better that it didn't last. Maybe it was always meant to be temporary, a footnote instead of a headline. Historians still debate the legacy of the Viking voyages to North America. Some argue they had no lasting impact, no cities, no colonies, no cultural diffusion. Others suggest that the very act of reaching that far west centuries before Columbus changed the psychological map of the world. That the sagas, even in their fragmented form, represent a profound shift in human ambition. You think back to Bjarni, that merchant who got lost and didn't even stop to look around. He might have been the first to see it all and the first to turn away. Now your bones ache a little more than they used to. The wind cuts sharper. But your mind is clear. And as you lie down on your fur-lined bed, the crackling hearth nearby, you realize it wasn't just about the land, or the settlement, or even the stories. It was about the going, the daring, the ridiculous idea that maybe, just maybe, you could sail into the unknown and build something new. And you did, even if it didn't last. You close your eyes. Somewhere across the ocean, the forests still stand. You open your eyes to the scent of brine and old wood. You're back at the harbor again. The longships bob gently, not with purpose, but with memory. Their hulls carry the ghosts of voyages past their sails, folded like the wings of sleeping birds. You watch a boy trace the curves of a dragon prow with wide-eyed wonder, while an elder nearby mutters corrections to a saga being retold with just a bit too much dragon slang. Life in Greenland trudges on, but you can feel the tales of Vinland beginning to shift from fresh memory to distant legend. Younger generations treat them like fables, equal parts inspiration and impossibility. A place where grapes grew wild, they whisper. Where wood was endless and the sun lingered longer. Some believe it. Others smirk. But you know what's real. You tasted those berries, hauled those timbers, felt the air thicker and warmer than anything in Greenland's biting chill. The land was real, whether the settlement endured or not. Back in the longhouse, Leif is carving again. Not a boat this time, but a flat slab of driftwood. He's begun drawing a map, not a perfect one, more like a memory etched in curves and coastlines. A swirl here for a bay, a notch there for the inlet where you first anchored. He's marking something intangible possibility. Mainstream history remembers Leif Erikson as Leif the Lucky. The title is oddly ironic. His voyage west was bold, yes, but it also came with as much retreat as reward. Historians still argue whether Leif's name became legend because of what he actually accomplished, or because later Norse communities needed a symbol of courage when times got hard. You watch a trader's spread news iron is scarce again. Wool prices have changed. A few ships have vanished. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, tightening grip of isolation. Greenland is always 1 or 2 winters away from feeling too far from the rest of the world. And yet the stories of Vinland still glow faintly like embers. In one longhouse, you catch a whispered conversation. 2 teenage boys plotting to build a boat just like Leif's to sail west and find the place for themselves. You smile, but your eyebrows arch involuntarily. You remember how hard it was. The currents, the scurvy, the sheer distance. But then again, didn't you once feel that same fire? Here's something delightfully odd. One Norse account casually mentions that the explorers in Vinland caught a uniped, a one-legged creature that screeched, hopped furiously, and shot an arrow into the gut of one unlucky Viking. Scholars today aren't exactly lining up to endorse that tidbit. Some suggest it was a distorted memory of a Native American warrior on one leg, possibly an injury, or perhaps a wooden prosthetic. Others think it was metaphor or myth, a literary device, to capture how strange and unpredictable the land felt. Either way, it's made it into the storybook versions. Kids love the Uniped. You start noticing small carvings appear etched into tools, doorway lintels, even spoons. Trees that don't exist in Greenland. Berries shaped like teardrops. Boats sailing west with stars above them. These are quiet acts of remembrance. People are holding on to Vinland not as a place to return to, but as a symbol of boldness. Still, you see signs of entropy. Thatched roofs sag. Snow creeps in through cracks. People talk more about taxes from Norway, about the Pope's new proclamations, about whether the seas are angrier than they used to be. The world is changing, and not always for the better. You help patch a boat one day, and a younger man asks if it's true if the soil in Vinland was really soft enough to grow barley. You pause, wondering how much to say. Finally, you nod. Yes, it was. He asks if it's worth going again. You pause again longer this time. Maybe. The tricky thing about history is how it calcifies. Events become stories. Stories become symbols. And eventually symbols get reduced to neat little phrases. Leif the lucky, Vinland the good. The nuance, the contradictions, the long cold nights of doubt, those vanish. Historians still debate whether the Norse fully abandoned the idea of the Western lands, or whether a few fringe voyages continued for generations. There are tantalizing traces, a 14th century coin found in Maine, likely trade not settlement timber buildings, that might have Norse architecture sagas that mention new trips decades later. But nothing conclusive. Nothing you could hammer into stone. One night, you lie awake listening to the wind. It howls down from the mountains like it's telling stories of its own. You imagine what the land across the sea looks like now, untouched again, the buildings caved in, the clearings swallowed by green. Somewhere a fox sleeps beneath the turf wall of a collapsed hut. You whisper, "We were here to no one in particular." Then you close your eyes. A few years later, a skald visits from Iceland. He sits near the fire, sipping broth, and starts to recite. His words dance and roll in the warm air. It's a saga one about you, about Freydis, about Karlsefni. It's a patchwork of truth and exaggeration, of real people and storybook logic. But the audience is rapt. You feel your cheeks flush when your name comes up mispronounced slightly, but there nonetheless. You've made it. You're part of the tale. The skald ends with a flourish, claiming that you once looked out at Vinland and said, "This land is too bold for small hearts." You never said that. But you wish you had. The winter creeps in slow this time, slower than usual. It doesn't roar so much as it seeps. You pull your furs tighter and watch the snow drift in lazy, directionless swirls outside the longhouse. Greenland, always stoic, begins to feel more like a place in waiting than a place of motion. And the tales of Vinland, they've shifted entirely into bedtime stories. You pass by a family one evening, the father carving fish, while the youngest child tugs at his sleeve, asking if it's true that grapes in Vinland grew right out of the ground, sweet as honey. The father smiles, glancing at you, and says, "Only if you're lucky enough to find them." It's strange. You were there, and yet somehow you feel like a myth too. The church remains the only building that seems to get repaired with any urgency. The bishop has sent new word from Norway again. More formal prayers, more structure, more rules. There's talk of sin, of penance, of forgetting the heathen stories. You stare at the painted wooden cross above the altar, thinking it might have once been part of a Vinland pine tree. Mainstream historians now refer to this period as the slow decline of the Norse Greenland settlements. Trade routes with Norway became erratic. The climate cooled during what's now called the Little Ice Age. Fewer ships, fewer tools, less food, no cavalry coming. You help rebuild a roof with a few neighbors, and someone sighs. We could use some of that Vinland timber now. It lands half as a joke, half as a dirge. That evening, a woman named Sigrid shows you her embroidery. It's a simple linen panel, but the thread work is careful and deliberate. A long ship rides toward a sun that sits impossibly large on the horizon. Birds swirl overhead. The coastline stitched in ochre and green is unmistakable. "For my daughter's dowry," she says. So she'll know there's more than this place. You trace a stitched tree with your fingertip and remember the smell of Vinland's woods. Not sharp like spruce, but soft and rich and slightly damp. The kind of air that makes your shoulders unclench without asking why. The strangest rumor begins to circulate a story that a fragment of a Christian cross was found deep inland, far from the Greenland settlements. Not near the church, but tucked beside a stream half buried in moss. Some claim it was from one of the later Vinland expeditions. Others believe it was carried by native peoples in trade or maybe even gifted. Historians still argue whether Norse and Native American interactions were fleeting skirmishes or had moments of cautious exchange, shared meals, or even shared beliefs. And then the dreams begin. Not prophetic ones, just echoes. You start to wake with a taste of berries in your mouth, with sand between your toes, with the rhythmic creak of a sail rope in your ear. It's as though the memory of Vinland doesn't want to go quietly. During one particularly bitter night, Freydis joins you at the fire. She's older now, but still sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. You talk for hours about the land across the sea. Her laugh is hoarse but full-bodied. "They'll forget us," she says. "They'll forget you too. But that land will remember." You both fall silent after that. That spring, a ship arrives from Iceland bearing new laws and old gossip. A young man named Snorri, yes, that's Snorri Karlsefni's son, is writing down sagas now, putting it all to vellum, trying to preserve what time is quickly swallowing. You're not sure whether to feel honored or annoyed when you learn he's added a sea serpent to your first voyage. Another traveler brings a musical instrument you haven't heard in years, a tagelharpa. Its sound is melancholy, like the low hum of wind trapped in a cave. He sings softly of lands to the west of warriors, who couldn't stay of forests that hid both blessings and teeth. You glance at a map etched in bone, hanging above the hearth. It's rudimentary, barely functional, but it has one line drawn across the sea. It's a thread between continents, faint but unbroken. One day, you help bury a neighbor. Not unusual life in Greenland is hard and winters are unforgiving. But this time, the ritual feels different. The family has placed a small stone at the grave's foot painted with simple ochre swirls. It's from Vinland, the daughter tells you. Father brought it back, said it was lucky. You nod. Whether or not it was is beside the point. The story made it real. And so even as the settlement thins, and people speak more of Iceland than New Worlds, the story remains like a marrow inside the bone. Another quirky footnote. There's speculation that a Norse spindle whorl used for spinning wool was found on Baffin Island, far from the Lance O Meadows site. It's never been confirmed, and debates rage on about contamination dating accuracy and whether this proves more extensive Norse contact. Still, you can't help but imagine some explorer's wife tugging at her husband's sleeve before he boarded a longship, slipping the tool into his pouch, just in case. And that's the tone now, just in case. The stories, the stitched coastlines, the whispered bedtime tales, all held, just in case the world needs them again. On your last night before the sea, ice thickens again, you take a walk past the edge of the settlement. The stars are bright. No moon. The wind is still rare for this place, and you see the horizon sharp and cold and endless. You raise a hand, not in farewell, but in acknowledgement. You're repairing a sail by firelight when the call comes, someone saw something on the water. At first you dismiss it. Just sea ice glinting strangely, or maybe a gull riding the breeze. But no, they say this one had a mast. A real ship. You step outside blinking against the cold light of day. Sure enough, far beyond the last of the seaweed-covered rocks, a single longship bobs on the horizon. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel that familiar thrum in your chest. The pull. Not of adventure, not anymore, but of recognition. Of a thread, however frayed, still tying you to something larger. The ship is battered. Its hull is scabbed with salt. But aboard are travelers young and old. Icelanders mostly, some eager, some plainly terrified. They bring messages, supplies, and a strange, quiet urgency. A new bishop is coming. Greenland is being reabsorbed into the church's greater ambitions. The stories of Vinland. They're being written down, now smoothed, shaped, edited. One scribe confesses over ale that he's been told to make it more heroic. Less confusion, more triumph. You almost laugh. Good luck with that, you mutter. Mainstream historians often credit this moment, the late 1200s, as the final chapter of Norse Greenland's meaningful link with the rest of the Norse world. Trade becomes scarce. Climate worsens. Eventually, the Western settlement vanishes entirely. Some suggest disease. Others point to famine, Inuit conflict, or just plain abandonment. Historians still argue whether it was a slow fade or a sudden exit, whether it ended with a whimper or was quietly absorbed into something new. The new arrivals bring clothes tools and news of a world that seems increasingly distant. There's a new pope, one says. And Mongols adds another, as if that explains anything. You nod, but your heart isn't in it. You're not thinking about Rome. You're thinking about the carved wood still tucked beneath your bunk. The map leaf never finished. That night, you walk to the water's edge, fingers tingling in the cold. You've brought the carved plank with you. The edges are worn smooth by time. You place it on a flat rock and sit beside it. The stars overhead are impossibly sharp. You close your eyes and try to remember the feel of warm earth underfoot of vines curling around your ankles, of the smell of loamy, unspoiled land. You remember the cries of seabirds so loud it felt like a song. You remember Fridice's boots squelching in the mud, the hiss of salmon being grilled over flame, the quiet, constant murmur of the woods. You remember. The next day, one of the scribes asks if you'd be willing to tell your version of the Vinland voyage. We want to compare accounts, he says, scratching at his frostbitten cheek. You pause, then shrug. Sure, but you don't tell them everything. Just pieces. The berry bushes, the fog, the shoreline that kept shifting in your memory. You leave out the way you used to speak to the land, like it could hear you. You leave out the one night you dreamed the trees were watching you back, and you definitely leave out the part where you cried the day you left. The scribe thanks you and hurries off to warm his ink. You wonder what version he'll write. Probably the one with brave sailors and clean-cut battles. Maybe he'll leave in the part where you vomited from bad fish and swore you saw a ghost among the trees. Probably not. Here's a fringe detail they never include. Some saga fragments describe Vinland as having worms in the ground, so large they cut through iron. It's likely poetic metaphor, or maybe an overblown reaction to aggressive beetle larvae. But you like the image of land not just wild, but alive, uncooperative. You know exactly what that's like. You find yourself mentoring one of the new boys, a sharp one always sketching boats in the dirt. You teach him knots, sail angles. He asks about Vinland. You say the seas are long and the land is stubborn. He smiles like that's the best thing he's heard in months. One night he asks if he could ever sail there himself. You hesitate. If you do, you say don't try to tame it. Just listen. The church begins to dominate community life more and more. More rituals, more restrictions, less drinking. You find it oddly comforting in some way structure in a place where the sky never seems to end. But it's also quieter. The stories feel muffled now, like they're being kept behind glass. A local boy carves a new dragon prow and mounts it on a sled, not a ship. For practice, he says. It's a beautiful piece. But you notice something new. He's carved vines, twisting up the beast's neck. Grapes. Vinland lives on, if only in design. The weather turns again. Fiercer this time. The wind is sharp as knives, and even your thickest wool does little to shield you. The world feels brittle. You stay indoors more. Talk less. But the fire is always burning. There's always soup. And there are still children who ask, "Tell me the story again." The one with the wooden house and the fish pond and the sleeping forest. And you always do. It changes a little each time, of course. Maybe the river gets wider. Maybe the natives speak with birds. Maybe you leave out the fear. But always the land is good. The final time you tell it, your voice is soft. You don't need to embellish. The listener knows the rhythm now. You close your eyes, halfway through letting the words carry themselves. You say, "We found it. We left it." But it's still there, and the child nods like she understands. You wake one morning to the sound of snow sliding off the roof, heavy, muffled final. The winter has grown long and lean. You dress slowly, joints stiff, and make your way out to the edge of the settlement where the sea used to be. Now it's just ice. The boy you once mentored, he's older now, taller than you, sharper in the eyes, walks beside you, carrying a bundle of dried fish. He doesn't ask about Vinland anymore. Not directly. Instead, he asks questions like, "Do you think it ever snows there?" Or, "Did the trees make noise when the wind blew?" And you answer, "Always." Today he asks, "What do you miss most about it?" You look across the snowfield where the last of the sun flickers like a dying lantern. The green, you say after a while. Not just leaves, but green air. Like the light itself was made of moss and warmth. He nods. That sounds nice. And then, quietly, "Do you think we'll ever go again?" You want to say yes, but the weather has turned cruel. Food stocks are tight. Some families are moving to the eastern settlement. Others speak of taking boats and trying for Iceland, though, with storms like these that feels like a death sentence. Mainstream history tells us that by the late 1300s, Norse Greenland was a ghost of its former self. Trade routes dried up. The Little Ice Age tightened its grip. And after centuries of holding out against frost, famine, and distance, the last recorded contact between Greenland and Europe came in 1408, a wedding. After that, nothing. Just silence. Historians still argue whether the final settlers died out, assimilated with local Inuit, or sailed away to unknown lands in a final burst of restless hope. One odd detail stands out in archaeological digs: very few human remains from those final decades. It's as if the people simply left. That night, as wind batters the walls and the oil lamp flickers low, you think about your old ship. She's gone now, timbers scavenged for firewood mast, repurposed into a gatepost. But you still remember how she creaked under your feet, how the ocean hissed past the hull like a living thing. You dream of her sometimes, of setting out alone, just you and the stars. You'd point the prow west and go until the map gave out. You wouldn't need much. A bit of smoked cod, a coil of rope, and that same carved plank tucked under your arm like a compass. The boy now, a man, builds a small model ship and floats it in the hot spring pool near the edge of the village. It spins gently, rudderless. "I named it Brew till Grena Yardar," he says. "Bridge to the Greenland." You smile. One afternoon, a group of hunters returns frostbitten and grim. Too many wolves, they say, and no more caribou. Supplies run lower. People begin to whisper. Some want to sail. Some want to stay. A few want to walk inland toward the mountains, chasing rumors of friendlier climates, hidden valleys warmed by volcanic springs. It sounds like madness, but then again, so did sailing to Vinland. There's an old woman who tells stories in a sing-song voice. She claims she saw a ghost once in the snow wearing clothes no Norseman would wear. Inuit, someone says. She shakes her head. No, not like that. This one had leaves in her hair. Everyone laughs nervously. You don't. That night you sit by the fire and listen to the wind moan through the gaps in the wall. It sounds like a voice. Or maybe you're just lonely. A new baby is born. You help build the cradle. He is strong, loud, squirmy. The mother names him Leaf. Everyone smiles. A visiting trader brings word from Iceland. Things aren't much better there. Cold as hell's own pantry, he grumbles. But there are churches still standing. Inns, roads that get cleared, civilization. Whatever that means. He also brings you a gift, a carved bone needle from Norway. From a monastery, he says. Thought it looked like something you'd appreciate. You run your fingers along the grooves. They feel like runes. It's a quiet moment, but it stays with you. This strange continuous thread between places, even as everything else frays. The boy with the ship. The baby named Leaf. The carved bone from a continent you haven't seen in decades. Somehow, it all feels connected. And just like that one morning, the sun rises with a little more warmth. Snow begins to melt. Birds return. The sea breathes again. People begin talking about farming, fixing boats, planting something, anything. You wake in the middle of the night, suddenly alert, convinced you heard the word Vinland whispered through the smoke hole above your bed. But there's only the wind. Still you smile. You walk to the shore just as the first light kisses the water. You see the boy, you'll always think of him that way, standing with a net in his hands. He glances at you. I think the fish are back, he says. You nod. Good. But you're not looking at the fish. You're looking past him across the waves toward a horizon you haven't seen in years. Not since the days of green air and wild grapes. Not since Vinland. You stand at the edge of the water as spring peels winter back like bark from a birch tree. The sea is alive again, choppy silver gray, full of murmurs and promises. Your breath fogs in the crisp air. But for the first time in months, you can smell wet earth beneath the ice. Renewal. In the village, people are emerging from their huts like bears waking from hibernation. Someone's pounding a drum made of seal skin. A child chases a dog through the slush. Laughter feels strange, like trying on boots you haven't worn since autumn. You're helping patch an old boat. She was nearly lost to rot, but with a bit of pitch, a borrowed plank, and some clever lashing, she's beginning to resemble a vessel again. There's talk of testing her soon. Nothing too far, just hugging the coast. A seal hunt, maybe. But still the sea stirs something in your chest that no fjord ever quite quenches. And then the messenger arrives. He's a stranger. Young, broad-shouldered, wearing a cloak that's seen miles of weather. He speaks Norse, but not your dialect. He carries a carved token from the eastern settlement, and more importantly, he brings a story. A man came back, he says. You blink. From where? From across, he replies. The room goes still. No one asks what across means. You all know. Mainstream historians still debate how long Norse contact with North America persisted after the initial expeditions. Some claim the settlements were abandoned within a few years. Others argue for decades of quiet travel, fishing, trading, scouting, always just beyond the fog of written record. A few bold scholars whisper about entire families moving west, leaving no trace behind. This stranger tells of one such man, a fisherman, who vanished with his sons years ago. Most assumed they were lost to storms or ice. But last autumn, the man reappeared in Iceland, thinner, grayer, but alive. And he told stories. He said there's still a place, the stranger continues, not far from where your ancestors landed. There are wild fields and forests with deer. He traded with the locals cautiously. They gave him maize and something like beans. You swallow. Your hands tremble slightly on the oar handle you've been whittling. He said the man lowers his voice. He saw a house, Norse-built, old, collapsed but still standing. It's a story. Just another tale passed between campfires and coastal taverns. But something about it settles inside you like an ember catching dry moss. For the next week, you can't stop thinking about it. Every time you mend a net or stir stew, your thoughts drift back to that old house in the woods. Who built it? Was it yours or someone like you? Did they leave on purpose or never make it back? You share the story with the boy man now, who listens with bright eyes and a sharpened blade in his hand. He's been building a new hull from driftwood and ambition. We could go, he says. You look at him. It's dangerous. He shrugs, so is staying. You don't reply, but later that night, you unearth your old sea charm, a tiny Thor's hammer worn smooth by salt. You hang it around your neck again. Preparations begin quietly. You help carve ribs for the boat. Others join silent, steady, curious. The project becomes real. A sail is stitched. Fish are dried. The mast is blessed. You hold a small gathering. There's no formal announcement, no horn blowing or saga singing. Just neighbors passing bread and salted meat, nodding at one another, each person trying to decide if they envy you or pity you. That night, someone leaves a gift by your door, a sealed flask of honey mead and a tiny whittled raven. You keep both. One morning, as fog swirls low over the fjord, you test the boat. She floats like a dream, gliding across the inlet. She doesn't creak once. You whisper a name under your breath, Hope Setter. No one else needs to know. A week later, the boat is stocked. 5 of you are going, you the boy, now man, a quiet girl who fishes better than any of the men, and 2 brothers who finish each other's sentences. You kiss the shore goodbye. Not literally, Vikings aren't sentimental like that, but in your own way. You plant your foot one last time in the Greenland soil and think, if I don't come back, let this be my marker. As you push off, the village grows small behind you, a scattered line of huts and hope clinging to rock and ice. Ahead, endless gray. A seabird circles once overhead, then flies west. It's the quiet that surprises you most. Once the shore is behind you, the only sound is water against wood and the soft hiss of your sail. Even the others fall silent, each lost in their own storm of thought. The sky is leaden. The sea is patient. You aim your prow toward memory. And again, the thought rises unbidden. What if it's still there? The idea lodges deep like a splinter beneath skin. Not just a place, but a possibility. Not a second chance, a third. The wind stiffens. The sail swells like a lung. For the first time in years, you feel entirely untethered, cut loose from the past, coasting toward it a maybe. The sea stretches ahead, not smooth, not wild, but something in between, like a held breath stretched taut across the horizon. The boy now man sings as he steers. It's not a tune you recognize, but it feels old, like it's been hiding in the back of his throat for generations. A lullaby for the brave or foolish. The girl laughs and adds a verse. The brothers just grunt and keep rowing. You head west, not wildly, not blindly, but with purpose. You hug the coastline at first, stopping at familiar inlets, trading silence for seal meat stories for directions. Then, When the time comes, you turn away from land. Days pass. The stars become your familiar map again, that slow waltz of pinpoint lights across a velvet sky. You whisper greetings to Orion and the Pleiades, old friends who never fail to show. On the fifth morning, the wind shifts, bringing warmth. You taste it faint but real. Grass, pine, earth not buried under snow. Somewhere not far is land that's breathing. Historians still argue whether these second-wave Viking voyages were real or imagined. Archaeologists point to tools, stray coins, curious bones. But others claim the evidence is circumstantial ghost footprints in soil too soft to hold shape. Still, the idea persists that the Norse didn't just land once, but returned again and again, chasing whispers of home on the other side of the sea. On the eighth night, the fog comes, thick as fleece curling in from every side. You can't see the moon. The water turns slick, soundless. You call for quiet and listen. Then you hear it, not the crash of waves, but the hush of them being stopped by something solid. You inch forward, oars' feathered breath held. The girl sees it first, a shape in the fog. Low, broad, not rock. Shore, she says. Landfall. You stumble as the boat kisses sand. The impact is gentle but surreal. After so many days on shifting water, solid ground feels like a lie. You disembark slowly each step, sinking into dark, cold sand. Behind you, the others unload supplies. You keep walking just past the tide line until you find something unexpected. A tree, not a mighty oak or anything dramatic. Just a modest pine, its needles brushing your arm like a welcome. You laugh. You can't help it. You reach out and pat the trunk. Hello. The brothers come behind you, dragging a barrel between them. One pauses, stares, then gestures with his chin. Smokey mutters. You squint. He's right. A thin column rising faintly in the distance, curling up and then vanishing into the sky. Someone else is here. Your party hunkers down for the night, tucked just beyond the tree line. No fire's too risky. You chew dried fish and pass the mead flask. The boy, now man, draws a map in the dirt, based on the stranger's story. If there's a river bend here, he whispers, then the house would be just beyond that ridge. You nod. At first light, sleep is thin and nervous, but morning comes. The air is damp. Birds chatter. Somewhere nearby, a fox yips. You set off cautiously, moving inland. The landscape is beautiful in its wildness, tall grasses rolling terrain, trees with bark like puzzle pieces. You see deer prints and the occasional snapped branch that makes you reach for your knife. Then the brothers stop. One of them points. There, in a small clearing, stands what's left of a structure. It's barely standing, half-collapsed, overgrown, but the shape is right. Stone base, timber frame. No nails, just pegs. Moss curls across the walls. A roof beam leans like a tired shoulder. You approach slowly. Touch the wood. It's solid, Viking solid. And inside, scattered like offerings, an iron knife hilt, rusted but recognizable. A spindle whorl. A broken comb made of bone. These aren't your things, but they could be. The girl kneels and picks up a small, hollowed stone. Lamp, she murmurs. You exhale. Historians have found similar items, iron rivets, worked stones, carpentry styles that don't match local traditions. Some say it's proof. Others call it coincidence. Still, the mystery remains how much of the Norse world brushed against this continent's edge. You stay in the clearing all day. You eat lunch on a fallen beam. The boy, now man, starts sketching the layout in charcoal on bark. The brothers poke around, find more fragments. A spoon, a piece of chain. It starts to feel less like a ruin and more like a message. Not just we were here, but we meant to return. That night, you build your first fire. Small, careful. You roast fish and drink the last of the mead. You talk in whispers. "What do we do now?" the girl asks. You stare into the flames. "We tell the others." "How?" You shrug. "We build something." The next morning, you begin clearing brush. By afternoon, the clearing is wider, brighter. You've set stones for a hearth, tied a rope between two pines to hang wet clothes. The boat is anchored safely in a cove. The birds haven't stopped singing since dawn. You find a spot for a carved marker. A rune stone someday. Not yet. But you have the place picked out. As you sit under the same pine from your first night, you realize something you haven't thought of Greenland once all day. This doesn't feel like an expedition anymore. It feels like the start of something else. The morning air is still soft as wool, and you find yourself waking not from sleep, but from something deeper, a kind of quiet becoming. The forest exhales mist, and the half-built hearth still holds warmth from the fire you carefully banked the night before. Around you, others are beginning to stir. You stretch back stiff from sleeping on pine boughs and take a moment to look around, not just at the camp, but at what it might become. You've done something most people will never do, stepped into the unknown, and not only survived, but started to shape it. Today you scout further inland. The brothers bring their axes, not for battle, but for wood. The girl carries a pouch of seeds saved from Greenland's cold soil and wrapped carefully in cloth. The boy, now man, he hums a tune again, something steady, hopeful. As you walk, the forest opens like a lazy jaw. You pass a line of stones unnaturally straight. A sign, maybe. Historians still argue whether native peoples and Norse voyagers interacted peacefully, violently, or at all. Some sagas claim skirmishes, others mention trade. Some scholars believe the Norse adapted words from local dialects. Others think that's just a linguistic coincidence. You pause at the top of a small rise. Below, a stream cuts across the clearing, its banks lush and promising. To your left, deer trails. To your right, thick woods that would offer shelter and enough timber for another structure. You nod. Here, the others get to work with the quiet purpose of settlers. It's a rhythm older than stories, clear build, protect, repeat. The girl starts planning near the water's edge. The brothers raise corner posts for a second shelter. The boy, now man, digs a fire pit, stacking stone like his father taught him. You find a flat rock and sit. You're not overseeing, you're watching. Watching something begin. You take out your knife and a small slab of driftwood. You carve not for art, but for memory. Runes slowly forming a record of the day, the place, the people. You know without knowing how that others will come. Maybe from Greenland, maybe even Iceland. You've laid the beginning. That's enough. By midday, the sky darkens not from weather, but birds. A murmuration of starlings wheels overhead like a thought forming. They twist, gather, then scatter westward. You watch them vanish into the horizon and feel a strange pull, as though the land itself has ideas of its own. Back at camp, someone finds berries. You inspect them cautiously, red, clustered, not familiar. The girl pops one into her mouth before you can stop her, then grins. Sweet. Dinner includes fish, roasted root vegetables, and these mystery berries. You eat carefully, every flavor heightened by hunger and risk. You eat together. That night, the conversation is quiet but expansive. Think we'll last the winter, one brother asks. You glance up at the sky. Stars again, but warmer now. Less foreign. If we prepare it right, you say maybe longer. He nods, then curls up by the fire and is asleep within minutes. You can't sleep just yet. You wander the edge of the camp, tracing the perimeter. You step lightly over roots, nod at the dark trees. There's no fear in them now, just presence. You wonder what lies beyond, deep in the unknown forest. Other people. Other stories the saga doesn't say. But the night speaks in soft wind and rustling branches, and you listen. In the distance, you hear a crack, not threatening, just nature's turning. An owl hoots, a fox yips again. All is in motion, and yet You are still, settled, centered. Historians still argue how long the Norse remained here. A season, a generation. Did they integrate, quietly leave when the ships stopped coming, or vanish into myth? No one agrees. No one can. But you're here now in this living moment where argument hasn't yet fossilized into history. You have rope burns on your palms, dirt under your nails, smoke in your hair. You've seen the fog part, seen the coast unfurl like a scroll, seen a pine tree wave hello on a foreign beach. And now you've seen this place become something more than a dot on a map. It's a heartbeat, a promise, a beginning. The girl adds another log to the fire. The flames leap up, then settle into the glowing hush of contentment. She hums, not the boy now man's song, but something older. You lie down and look at the stars again. They've shifted slightly, just enough to remind you time is passing. You whisper something into the dark. Not a prayer, not a farewell, just acknowledgement that you are here, that this matters, and that the world, vast and strange as it is, may yet remember your name in the rustle of trees and the crackle of fire. The days begin to blend, now sunrises layered in mist, evenings perfumed with smoke and pine. You no longer count them, not out loud. The rhythm of survival has smoothed into a kind of quiet purpose, and the sharp edges of arrival have softened into something almost like home. The structures rise one by one. Longhouse walls of timber and sod. A crude storehouse for dried fish and roots. A fenced area where the girl coaxes herbs to life from unfamiliar soil. And a lookout just barely high enough to see the glint of the ocean in the distance, your past always shimmering just behind you. You climb it sometimes when sleep won't come. From up there, the wind speaks a different language. It hums through your bones and tells you nothing and everything. Below, the others sleep. Even the boy now man snores softly now, the ever-watchful gleam in his eye dulled into something more peaceful. You've all changed. One of the brothers, the one with the broken tooth, has started carving spoons, beautiful, ridiculous spoons with animal faces on the handles. The other brother has a knack for weaving mats from tree bark. You tease him gently about becoming domestic. He calls you chief now with a half smile. You find a single feather in your boots one morning. Bright blue. Not from any bird you know. A gift, a warning, a curiosity. You place it on the mantel above the hearth anyway. Symbolism counts even when you don't know what it means. The girl makes tea from something mint-like, and the scent fills the shelter each evening. She started telling stories, some from Iceland, others she makes up entirely. Last night's featured a fox with a lisp who outwitted a bear by pretending to be a ghost. You all laughed too hard at that. Even out here, laughter finds you. That's no small miracle. But you know, even now, this can't last forever. The nights grow longer, and though the game is still plentiful, you feel the shift. The trees shed their confidence in a gust of yellow. The wind is testing you again. Winter's herald. You double your stores. You check the roof for leaks. You sew thicker linings into your cloak. You tell the girl to keep extra seeds hidden just in case. You sharpen tools. You test your limits. And yet, something's different. You no longer fear the cold as you once did. You respect it, sure. But fear that has faded. In its place, readiness. One morning, a small group of figures appears beyond the tree line. You stiffen, but it's not an ambush. They approach slowly, hands open, faces wary, others like you. From a distant settlement, or perhaps fresh from Greenland. They've heard of your camp. They want to stay. You nod once. There's room. They unpack quietly a few bundles of clothes, a dog with a bad leg, and a child with hair the color of copper bark. They ask nothing of you, except a place near the fire. And just like that, the story grows wider. The dog howls on its first night, as if remembering something sad. The child doesn't speak for 3 days. Then, without warning, she sings. Just a few bars. But they hang in the air long after trembling like a cobweb in the wind. Historians still argue how far Viking settlement in North America ever reached. Some claim a single generation at best. Others believe pockets of Norse descendants lived on for decades, quietly absorbed into the surrounding world. Some even believe artifacts found far inland may point to trade networks broader than the sagas admit. You don't know how long you'll stay. You don't know if the next generation will call this land home or return across the sea. But tonight, there's firelight on the walls and stories in the air. Someone mentions returning to the coast in spring to check if ships are coming. You nod. That makes sense. But your heart doesn't flinch like it once did. You're not just surviving anymore. You're here. This place has its own name now whispered among you. Half joke, half myth, all truth. The sagas will probably get it wrong. That's okay. You stand under the stars one more time before sleep. They've shifted again slightly. But this time, you recognize them. Friends now, not strangers. And you belong here. You breathe out slowly. You've earned this stillness. You've earned this night. And as your breath clouds into the cooling air, you feel the land. Accept it. The fire burns low, its embers pulsing gently like the steady beat of a heart. Your thoughts drift now, untethered and unhurried like fallen leaves on a slow-moving stream. The rhythm of the waves, the rustling pines, the soft hush of distant wind, they all fold together into a single, lulling hum. You feel your body grow heavier, not with weariness, but with quiet certainty. The kind that comes only after a long day's work. The kind that settles deep in the bones, wrapping you in something warm, something earned. Around you, the camp sleeps. The dog snuffles in its dreams. The fire pops one last spark. Even the stars blink slower now, gentle and kind. There's no more need to build, to plan, to carve, or scout. Not tonight. Tonight you just are, held by earth, blanketed by sky, cradled in a place that no longer feels foreign, but familiar. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let the story fade. You're safe here. You're home. Sleep well, explorer. You made it.